we go. Okay. Well, thanks to Magnus for this opportunity, Paul, whatever you'd like to be called. Magnus. For this opportunity to share. I hope you don't mind I have my notes. I want to be sure I remember everything because there's a lot to say about this topic of storytelling. As Magnus said, I did produce a web show called Aurelia, and you can kind of think of it like digital role play in essence, except that it was asynchronous because someone would post a video and then people would watch it and other people would post a response and then the story would kind of tag team. So that was really my first experience with that kind of storytelling. It was kind of diving off the deep end to go in and say, I want to run one of these, and just not having the experience. And as Carl can attest, since he was part of it, we had some bumps along the road, and I learned a lot from those bumps about how to make this sort of thing run smoothly and how to help people have the best experience. And how to have a good experience as an actor. So for those of you who, I know some of you expressed concern in Facebook when I asked for questions. Some said, well, I'm not a writer, and so this is a little bit harder for me to tell a story, or I feel shy, or things like this. If there was anybody that was scared about doing this in public, even online, even though it's video and it's kind of mediated a little bit, so it's like I'm not standing next to the person, and that's like 10 times scarier, I think, when you're at a live event. It was still super scary for me to do this personally, and I know it was for some of my actors. I got Facebook messages all the time, am I doing okay? I feel like I'm so bad at this, and they were great, you know, and they were doing fine. When I told them that, like, I really meant it. So there's a lot to say, but the biggest thing is just to dive in and do it. Let's see, where should I start here? Let me back up a little bit and just kind of give you a little bit of history on that project, because it's going to inform what I say about how to do this at a live event down the road. Originally, there was a serial that I wrote. It was a serialized novel that was pseudo-steampunk. It was a little bit steampunk. It was a lot more fantasy. If you go and look at it online, most of the artwork is more fantasy-oriented. And then a company called Theatrics that created a platform to hold all the videos and the blog posts and the photos for this collaborative storytelling sort of project. Saw it and approached me and said, hey, would you like to test our platform? We need some people who have a story world and an environment that people could come and play in, and we need someone to manage one of these. And I was zany enough to say yes. So I lost about 6 months of my life to running this. Yeah, how hard can this be, right? Just hire a few interns and some artists, because all these are online assets, and people have to see the world before they can be convinced to come and play in it. So we spent like a month and a half developing all of that, and of course they are thinking from a marketing perspective, and they had some people on their team who work in Hollywood all the time, and are used to working with Hollywood budgets, which of course we didn't have at all, which is me, you know, bootstrapping it. So they're like, can we have that done next week, you know, and like they're pushing the deadlines. I'm like, there's only 4 of us, you know, or whatever, me and a couple people I was working with. And so then the show actually ran for 15 weeks. So we had like 3 weeks of a test run, and then we ran for 12 weeks. And I literally did not go into this really knowing how the story would end. I had an idea. I created a scenario to where the story started at the end of where the book had left off, but I also designed it so that people didn't have to know didn't have to know a lot about the world to start with. I hoped anyway, to get involved and jump in. And then over the course of those 15 weeks, I watched where things were going, and I massaged my plans a little bit, and changed and made alterations and adjustments based on what was happening with the actors. So they actually helped to determine what the end was, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. You can do this multiple ways, but that is one way to do it, where you create sort of a scenario. You can go into it with a very defined ending, or you can go into it with it more open. I actually thought it was fun having it be really open and not quite knowing where things were going to go, because then we got more of a chance to build on everyone's collective creativity. So when this thing launched in June, suddenly I had people, many of whom I'd never met before, and they weren't even in Milwaukee, or some of them were, like Carl. Some of them were elsewhere in the United States, some of them were in Canada and the Philippines and Germany, and you know, they all wanted to live in this world together and tell a story and play together. And the biggest question on my mind, and I know several of you have expressed this, about this kind of storytelling is what happens, like how can all these people possibly live in a world together and not, their stories don't bump into each other, you know, what do you do when there's conflicts that arise? What if this guy's story is in 1850 and this guy's story is in 1860, and you know, all these different things. And so as we go into this, let me assure you, it is possible to do. There will be bumps along the way, I can attest to seeing those discussions on Facebook. But with a lot of communication and a lot of imagination and a lot of improv, Magnus and I were just talking about that, and I'm going to get some tips for that later on, you can do it, and it can be really great. For us anyway, I'll just say we were not a perfect project by any means, so I'm not going to stand up here and say, we had a great project and nobody ever felt like their story got trampled on, or nobody ever had a concern, or whatever. But the biggest thing was that people worked with each other to figure out something, or to figure out those miscommunication moments happen. So let's start with creating a story. I know some of you are like really interested in how do I go in and do this as a character, and some of you are interested in that, but you're also thinking, I've got an idea, and I want to invite some people to play in this story with me. Where do I start? Well, let me first start by asking you a question. What is a story? Let's start there. What is it? When someone says, I've got a story to tell, or I want you to be part of my story that I've created, what is it that this thing really is at its heart? Yes?
An event.
An event?
Something that happens.
Okay, yes, events are very important. Without an event, there's nothing going on, right?
The story is the narrative.
Narrative?
Of the event. And it's not the actual event, but it's talking about it.
Okay, so a narrative of an event.
It's the interactions.
Interactions. Interactions and a narrative of an event.
Well, I was actually going to say a sequence of interacting events, so I think all three work, yeah.
Okay, sequence of interacting events, yes, multiples. What else? What else makes up the story?
For the creators.
Characters.
Characters. Yep, we need people to drive those interactions, right?
For the creative side, it's an expression.
Yep, an expression. Yeah.
Well, to make it a good story, there needs to be some kind of story arc. There needs to be some kind of tension, and then there needs to be some kind of resolution. You need to be introduced at the beginning.
Yep.
So.
Tension, story arc. Is everyone familiar with the term story arc? Is that okay? Occasionally I talk to groups and people obviously familiar with stories, but just sometimes it's not the term arc. Anything else we want to add to this melding pot of what is a story? Because it really affects what you build at the end of the day.
Maybe a moral or a lesson or something that can be gleaned, whether it's for the people observing the story or the characters themselves.
Sure, yeah, so the moral of the story, or the lesson, theme, oftentimes the term is used about how that idea is looked at over the course of the story. Obviously you can't always know in a live event what's going to happen or how that's going to come out, but you might know something that your character is struggling with, or a concept or an idea that they're thinking about a lot. I like to throw it out this way. Everything that you have said is a crucial part of telling a great story. At its core, though, when I think about a story, and particularly telling a story with a group, think about it in terms of somebody wanting something and having trouble getting it. That's really the essence of what a story is. If you have somebody who wants something and they don't try to get it, then they're sitting on their front porch and there's no story. I mean, unless you really want to just watch the world go by and just point a camera at them and watch someone sit on their porch for a while. I mean, you could. But there's really no story. If you have someone who's running around doing stuff and confronting obstacles, but nobody's really sure what they're trying to achieve at the end of the day, then that's also going to struggle as a story too. Now there is a level at which, with telling a group sort of narrative, you might say, well, we do want to just create a scenario. We want to create a bunch of people in a time or place and kind of find out what happens. You can do that, but know that your group might struggle a little bit more to get going because you don't have that motivation. There's no goal. It's just like there's people. We're on an airship together, or we're in a boiler room together, or I don't know, we're in the Arctic together on an Arctic expedition. Whatever it might be. Obviously, you can with each of those scenarios, you can probably think immediately of some conflicts that might arise. But it can be really helpful to spell out a conflict. When I was thinking about Aurelia and I was inviting an unknown number of people, I mean, what if we'd ended up with 1,000? We didn't, but what if we had? There were other groups running stories from more well-known properties on that platform who did have 1,000 to 4,000 people playing in a space together. I had a much smaller group, but either way, I was thinking, okay, so what is the story of these people? And you can think of it in terms of that. If you're like, okay, well, if somebody wants something and is having trouble getting it, if that's a definition of a story, what happens when you have multiple somebodies? The answer then, or one answer, is to think about it as a group hero. Your group the people that are, the team, the scenario, the people in the space together that you're putting together to tell the story are the hero. Yes, they're all going to have their own motivations, they're all going to have many stories, right? Their own goals, their own conflicts. But at the end of the day, it's most helpful, I think I found, for moving plots forward if there's something that ties them all together, if they have a goal and they're also having obstacles. So in the case of Aurelia, what I did is I said, it's going to be a city. There was a city in the story that I had written, and so this was a natural space for people to come in and be a citizen of this town. But I didn't just tell them, okay, I created this place called Aurelia, it runs on steam power, it's stranded in a wasteland that's had an apocalypse 1,000 years ago, and you can't live outside the city. I could have told them all this, but if I hadn't given them like an overarching conflict as a group, there would have been really no forward movement. So I said, you're almost out of power to run your boilers. When you run out of the stuff in your mines or the trees in the forest, I don't really need forest in Aurelia, but when you run out of whatever is powering your boilers, which in our case was a mineral called garamite, which is mined in the mountain under the city, once you run out of that, and that's going to be very soon, then the lights are going to go out forever, and you can't leave this city, so you're all going to die. Humanity's going to die. Kind of overdramatic maybe, but whatever, it worked, right? And so your goal is to find a new source of light, or a new source of power, energy that can power those boilers, or hey, maybe find a really awesome mythical source of energy. You can turn the whole world back into a paradise again. Wouldn't that be awesome? That's actually not going to happen until the end of the series, so don't do that, but it's a possibility, right? And people told me, like I actually got emails and Facebook messages from people saying having that overarching conflict helped them to always feel like there were stakes bigger than themselves that they were working toward as a group. So whatever it might not be that dramatic. It could be as simple as your group needs to get this thing at the end of the event that you create, like the MacGuffin or like the object, the Holy Grail that you're trying to get to. It could be super small, it could be super simple, it could be super specific to your group, but just give them all something to reach forward together as a group. Good so far? Questions? Okay. So having a hero, goals, and obstacles as a group is really important. It might seem like a simple thing at first, but it really becomes major later on. We talked a little bit about scenario versus story. Like I said, you can do a scenario and kind of like let things happen, but if there's not a conflict to launch things off, you might struggle a little bit. Okay.
Lisa,
yes.
You've mentioned hero a couple of times there, and I guess I'd like a little bit more an explanation of what you see the hero as being. And you said a group hero.
Yep.
So who is the hero other than maybe the person driving the story or the center of the story? Is there more than
That's a great question. When I say group hero, I literally mean that for that big overarching plot, whatever the major conflict of the story is, the group gets to feel like they all help solve it in some small way. No, they might have not all pressed the button. Ideally, there's like, something that everyone can do, and I don't know, Carl can weigh in on whether or not it was successful. We tried to do that at the end of Aurelia, where we gave everyone a chance to like be part of a solution to the problem. But then within that, you still give everyone space to be the hero of their own story, because only you as an actor in a group storytelling scenario can really push your story forward. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but you will still need to know for yourself. If you're, in the case of Aurelia, if you're a citizen, yes, you don't want the lights to go out, but you also need to feed your children today. Or you need to steal this magic crystal from this other guy so you can sell it on the black market so you can take over the little world that you live in down in the 4th strata right now, right? Yes?
So when you're saying hero, could that, you also use the word protagonist?
Yes, yes, that's correct. Hero and protagonist in this case are interchangeable. You have to think macro and micro. Each person is a hero of a small little story that involves them and the people they choose to play with in the world. But then there's the big conflict that's driving everybody forward and may affect your individual characters more or less depending on the day or depending on the part of the story that you're at.
Well, I think that's a departure from the traditional storytelling literature that we might have more experience with, because you watch or you watch a lot of movies and there's like the hero in the movie, but there's one of those.
Exactly.
Right? And if you're going to do this as a group, you can't do it that way.
Right.
Because everybody else gets bored.
Right, exactly.
And I think when you I don't know if you watch BBC series and things like that, I think one of the reasons that like the BBC DC series tend to be a little more successful, is they do so multiple heroes. All of their series
Exactly.
have, you know, each person has their own thing going on that feeds into a bigger story arc.
You look at,
And you know, they also keep it real, so to speak, you know, and they off characters, and they're constantly refreshing that by adding new people in with their own little sub thing going on.
right, you look at Doctor Who that's been on TV pretty much nonstop for 50 years now. Part of the reason why they got away with that is because it's not just about the Doctor. It's about his companions, it's about these other organizations that he deals with. You know, and if it was just about the Doctor, it would have been a really great show for 2 years, and that would have been it.
Right.
And Babylon 5 is another good example.
Yeah.
It was a major story arc from beginning to end, and as you watched, you'd see things that looked like they might have been throwaway in a particular episode come back to bite somebody in the butt if they weren't taking care, and they weren't afraid to also kill off a major character or even a semi-minor one if that's what the story arc called for.
Exactly. Game of Thrones is also famous for
Yeah.
killing people off randomly. Oh, that's a really good tip that you brought up, by the way. Keep track of stuff that's happened in the story. It was easier for us in Aurelia because we had everything was archived as video, photo, or blog post, because that's just how the story was being told. But take notes if you go to a live event, because if you do want something to come back and bite somebody later, which is super fun because it's like setup and payoff, take note of it. Oh goodness, the last 3 weeks of Aurelia were a flurry. Everybody was like, what happened 6 weeks ago in my story that I can now like pay off with a vengeance? Or what happened between me and this guy 6 weeks ago that can now pay off with a vengeance? It's a lot of fun, you know, I mean.
One of the files I posted out on the SDK site is the Milwaukee canon, and that was the idea with that, is just to kind of track different things that were going on. You know, obviously, the first time I ever heard about that was from the Star Trek series with Gene Roddenberry. They had the Star Trek canon and how things were and what happened in the past, so that they could write future episodes as they cycle writers in and out. And you know, I think it'd be a great thing for the group or the SDK to do, because then when we get new people, or when people are looking for that hook or something to launch from, you can kind of go there and go, whoa, this is intriguing. This spurs the idea here. I could be that person that they're running from, or you know.
Sure.
Yeah. So having a group scribe or someone who's willing to like. I mean, you can have people submit that. I found that, like, you know, people are busy and sometimes it's hard to get everyone to remember to, like, post notes. But you have someone who just, like, catches people toward the end, if it's a live event or something, like, hey, what's really juicy that happened that we should remember and write down or whatever. It can be really helpful because then you have a record of it. And so the newbies who are coming in, that was a challenge we had with Aurelia. They did not set up that platform. I mean, if you go and visit it now, you'll see, like, here's all the information for getting started, here are the personas, here are all the calls to action that were like the major plot points, things that I threw out every week that were happening in the big like search for light plot, which is the major plot. But other than that, you kind of have to wade through everything, and like there's no like linear way to get through it. And so that was became a big thing for us, was like onboarding new people, because there was no real easy way to be onboarded, which when you have a lot of people playing together, you know, in something, it just takes a little extra organization, can really go a long way to helping people slide right in and find something. Yes?
Well, and you mentioned that you're going to address this for people who aren't writers. That actually is a real opportunity for people who are writers. Because I know the SCA group that I used to belong to, we had a couple of people who were really good at writing, and this was an opportunity for them to write these little scenes and vignettes without having to write a whole story. Right? They could practice their craft. And that just made it more entertaining for the rest of us to go back and read the canon. It wasn't sort of dry notes, they were actually fleshed out scenes and stuff like that. So.
That's fantastic. And a really great tool for that is Google Docs, because it now allows you to literally write together so that like you can see someone else's cursor and what they're typing while you're in it, and they can see what you're typing. And so we had a number of actors experiment with that, kind of from that perspective. People wanted to do text role play, and I think actually text got really heavy toward the end of things. People just had so much, we had a lot of writers, and they had so much fun, or people who wanted to experiment with writing, and they would be like, you so-and-so over here, you're in, your story and my story, let's get together, like let's meet, or let's exchange the secret item, or let's connive and inspire against this person over here. And then they'd set up a document, invite each other through email, and then they'd set up a time. Or if they could set up a time, they would do it again asynchronously, where someone would come in and type, and then someone else would come in and type their next move, and then you had this like little mini narrative that they had written together, and then they post it for other people to read and enjoy. So there's that's another good tip, is to think just beyond walking into the room and being your character, which is a really cool and important part of everything. But there's also that aspect where if you like other media, you can bring a rich depth to things that way. It's for everyone. And let's talk for a second about broadness. When we're talking about story here. A lot of people have asked me, like, what do you do when, like, my character's from 1850, or, my character's from this part of the world, but this is a story about England, or whatever, or whatever it might be. Or people who said, I have a traditional steampunk character who lives in an alternate British Empire, but the world I had created is a completely alternate world. Like, we don't even know where it is, it's not on Earth. I never named the continent. So how does that work? And my answer to that is lots of imagination, and think at the big level concept of who you are. If someone invites you to play in a world that doesn't take place in 1850, but your character lives in 1850, that is not really necessarily, for the purposes of the story, such an important detail. You can say, I can take my boiler mechanic into the story and play without necessarily needing to worry about every detail of 1850 being correct. So we had some boiler mechanics and some, what else do we have? Some assassins for hire, for example, and some people who have been playing characters in other worlds who said, I'm just going to bring my character here. And I'm like, great, do that, because we have need of your type of character. It's just, you might have to think about respinning and reinventing a few details, or thinking a little more big picture about your character, and letting, I know if some of you are really into the historical accuracy thing, that may sound like heresy, but you can still go in and play and have a good time in a different sort of world. I was just talking to a guy at TessaCon who's doing some kind of steampunk RPG, I think he's out of California, and he said he had like steampunk Jedis who were approaching him, and they're like, I'm a Jedi, I really want to play in your world, but I can't because I'm a Jedi. And he's like, dude, you're a Zen master with a steampunk plasma blade or whatever it is. Just come be that. And they were like, oh, okay. And then suddenly like the world opened up and they realized that they could be their kind of character, but just alter a few details. So,
Just
yeah.
file the serial numbers off and change the name.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, so let's say, before we get into like actual gameplay, let's say you're the one creating the story, or like you have an idea, or I'd like to invite people in. When would you feel more comfortable inviting people? And there's really no right answer here. I'm honestly curious to hear what you have to say. Pre or post story creation? Like, would you rather go to someone and say, I think I want to tell a collaborative story, but I don't know what it is yet, and so let's all get together and kind of figure it out? Or would you rather like come up with the scenario or the like hero, goal, obstacle, group hero or whatever, and then go out and pitch it kind of and be like, hey, here's the story I came up with. You want to join me? Which would you rather do?
I suppose you could come up with some like keywords or basic ideas, or offer a menu of here are things I'm thinking of working with, which would attract you, and then once you just get a handful of starting points, then write the story.
For me, it's both answers.
Okay.
It kind of depends on the group I'm with.
Yep.
I find that if they're sort of versed in the storytelling aspect and what we're trying to accomplish, pre is always better because there's a lot more ideas shared and things spin in directions that you could never imagine, and they become really robust.
Yep.
But if it's a lot of newer people, then often it's good to give them the first couple of steps down the path and kind of usher them down something. Because otherwise it's this aimless wander in circles and not know where to start.
Right. Right. That was good.
Just as a random thought, I happen to have this in my pocket. We were at Dark Carnival last night.
Oh, that's cool.
And Dark Carnival is a group in Madison that does, I think they
That's
do
basic info.
little immersive like mystery things.
Yeah, go on, murder mysteries.
And they had come up with
That's
a
for the
map,
world and
and
jazz. I'm gonna put that here if you don't mind.
I'll sort of go back.
Somebody wants to look at it. Yeah, that's great. In fact, that's awesome, because then you can just hand that to new people. And then, even if you create like a simple exercise, like if you're new in this world, here's your first task. It doesn't have to be necessarily like, if those of you who may have been involved in live action role play, it doesn't have to be like a task or in a game sense, but yeah, you're smiling, okay. I always we'll get into discussion about LARP later, but there's always interesting perspectives on that end of things, but here's something you can do. So there's like one hook, like, oh, okay, I'm new, who do I talk to, what do I say, here's one thing. And oftentimes when people have one thing and they get a little warmed up, then they can kind of go off it. Also, whoever put out those character development sheets from last month, Nick, was it? Those are awesome. Thank you, both of you, for those. They're really helpful. Little exercises like that are super helpful also.
I was just going to weigh in on that.
Yeah.
I really think it kind of depends. I don't think it's necessarily better to start with a group of people from the beginning and then follow them all the way through, or to have people join in. It really is a matter of the comfort zone of the people who are starting. And different people look for different things. So my background is tabletop role play.
Yep.
And so in the game that we have, it's an ongoing campaign that's literally been running for years, and so we're always bringing new people into that game, and they're able to experience what's going on. What they usually look for, what first-time players usually look for, is some direction or some way that they feel that they're a part of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so if you can involve them in some way, that's the win. They don't necessarily have to be there at the start of the story, but they don't want to just not have an impact on the story. So they need to somehow get involved and immediately start interacting with some of the plot points, or maybe some of the other characters that are key to what's going on.
Probably don't want to be too overloaded with facts too, right?
Right.
There's only so much you can take in at the beginning.
Exactly. And most of the time the facts are irrelevant, it's just their journey, so you just have to make sure that they're having a journey. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And you also bring up an excellent point about how long is this going to go on? Is it going to be indefinite? Or is it going to have a defined end? I mean, because Aurelia was so intense, we had that really short duration. If you're only meeting periodically, or if you're only like playing online and through using a Facebook group or something, you might go on longer. But think about that, and then also think: are you going to limit the number of people that are involved in it? Are you going to keep it really small and intimate, or is it something where you are going to open it up? I had the marketing machine of theatrics behind me, and my payment for using the platform was giving them a show. So mine kind of had to be like, go out and find whoever you can find, anywhere in the world. and it was great. We had some fantastic people who surfaced and whatnot, but you might find it a lot more accessible to start with. I'm just going to invite either my friends or people in the steampunk group that I know or something like that to start. Or you might go out and try to find the world. Either way it works, you'll end up with some fun people. But that's a question to answer for yourself. And part of that is, am I willing and able, is my group comfortable, willing, and able to onboard new people if you're going to open it up continually throughout the course of play? And then how are we going to get those new people? One thing I did, and this was, again, because I was sort of orchestrating behind the scenes, and I had a couple people working with me, I would always assign one person, when a new person joined the site and posted their first video or their first blog and character, I had one person who would be like, I'd be like, go invite this person to do something with your character. And that gave them like their first moment where they were being interacted with in the story. A couple times it scared people off though, because I think they weren't like expecting another character to actually play with them. And so we had a couple of actors who like the first time someone showed up, a couple times I made the mistake of sending one of the like terrifying temple priests who like pontificated to them about how they were going to die or whatever, and I thought they would find it like fun, and people ran away after that. So careful who you send. I started sending the like more gentle characters later.
I have a question, but
yes.
it's too off topic. Just say it's too off topic.
No questions about topic. Go ahead.
I guess I'm sort of new to this idea. I didn't know that this was going on.
Sure.
And it sounds very exciting to me, very interesting. I'm not sure how much I would actually do it. So my question is, what is the kind of the business model? Because you got to eat, everybody's got to eat in the real world as well as their imaginary world. And also, what kind of penetration is expected? I mean, because I see some people really getting into this and loving this. Sure. I can see maybe it being popular because I'm picturing sitting around the campfire telling stories of
question. I mean, for most of us, and the kinds of stories, like I'm involved in a group right now that I'm not running. It's just a bunch of people who got together and said we wanted to tell a story, you know, about this cool group of people in this place, and it has a steampunk vibe, and et cetera, et cetera. And so mostly it's just people getting together and creating something, or like what Magnus and friends have done with Airship Fortuna, you know, bringing a group together to do it. As far as business, there's a couple answers to that question. One is there really isn't a business model. Obviously, RPGs can make some money and have for years with like the manuals and such. But for like theatrics, honestly, has found that their best customers are networks who want to create second screen experiences or like experiences that are related to ongoing shows that people can participate in because the network is willing to pay to use the platform and make it available. Whereas, you know, for the average creator like me or for the average Aurelia, I would never have wanted to ask, you know, people who are playing Aurelia to pay for that. Like, I just don't feel right about that. And I think a lot of gaming companies have also found that. I think even World of Warcraft found that at one point when they were trying to make certain tiers, like, you know, you had to pay to use it, and people just aren't as interested in that point. As far as the interaction versus sitting in front of my TV screen, that's one of the major challenges right now, what they call transmedia, which Aurelia kind of fell more in that side because it was mostly online, whereas most of what we're talking about here is probably going to be done in person, maybe Facebook at the most. But transmedia is basically like telling a story using maybe social media and a video website and other different. The story is spread across multiple places, and they found that only about 10 to 20% of fans are yet at the point where they really want to be immersed. Now the statistics say that number is growing, but like a sister show of ours at Theatrics was called Welcome to Sanditon, and this was a show that was run for the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is a really popular web series. Some of you may have heard of it. It's primarily targeted at teenage girls, but it had a really wide ranging age appeal. Ended up super runaway popular. 100 social networks or something was like involved with the original web series, and then their second season they said, hey, let's do an immersive show, and let's have everybody enter the world of Lizzie Bennet's Diaries as a citizen of her town, and they get to interact with her and with the characters from the show. How great is this going to be? Well, they had a huge number of signups the first week, but over the course of the show season, things kind of dropped off, and you had the diehards who were really excited about getting to build a character and play in this world. And then you had those people who are like, can you just bring back Lizzie Bennet's Diaries, the web series? Like, can we have 10 more episodes, And that's okay. And some of you may say, I like steampunk more in books or, when it shows up occasionally in a TV show or something. I prefer to have my characters sort of appear and act for me versus being one.
If I could just maybe weigh into Chuck's question right now.
Yeah.
I know that right now, in terms of the demographics for role-playing games, there's a resurgence in role-playing games right now. So I would say that it dropped off about maybe 15 years ago. There was a lull in that like interactive storytelling type of gaming that was happening. A lot of people, quote-unquote, fled that to go to like video games, which is obviously like the big growth industry in gaming right now. But role-playing games, I would say like in the last 3 years have actually started really taking off again and have more and more people that are quote-unquote interacting in those stories. Like you were saying, role-playing games are basically the storytelling that you were talking about around Fire years ago. And so, except interactive, everybody gets to tell part of the story with their character. And so that's coming back right now. That's like a very big growth industry within the game industry would be role-playing games, which nobody really expected a few years ago. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I had a lot of people, for Aurelia, I had a lot of people that came because they were, in their case, live action role players. We had some tabletop role players also who wanted to kind of experiment with that, but a lot of live. And along that, before we get into the actual details of character-to-character play, I want to make some notes about that. I am not a tabletop role player. I think it's awesome. I'd love to do more of it. I just never had before coming to this experience. Nor had I done LARP, which is live action role play. But I had one of my interns was like a 20-year veteran of LARPing and tabletop role playing, and then just had a lot of actors. If you choose to run your story more like a game, which you could come up with rules and you could run it, very structured like a live action role play often is structured. That's one way to do it. What I know how to do because of Aurelia is a much more like freewheeling, collaborative, here's the character goal conflict, now go, make a whole town full of people, and the subplots will emerge. And they did, lots of juicy ones too. Lots of intrigue. It is very different. And I had a lot of actors, very talented actors, very, just amazing at characterization, and really knowing their character's backstory and planning out what they were going to do. But therein became the challenge, is they were used to planning ahead. And I don't know all the different kinds of role play, but for whatever they had done, they were used to doing that. And they were very adamant about how their story was going to turn out and the way it was going to go. But when you're dealing with a fully collaborative experience, you're talking about improv, practically. And I'm going to give you some tips for that in a minute. But someone can like show up, in the case of Aurelia, or in the case of your case at an event, someone can show up either on video or live and say, oh yeah, those crystals you just discovered, yeah, I just stole one. Well, in a collaborative story, then you roll with that. Okay, this dude stole a crystal, now what am I going to do next? But for them, it was like panic. Like, no, you can't have stolen the crystal because I'm about to do this, and the next week I'm going to do that, and next week I'm going to do that. Not everyone was like that, but I saw this happen quite a bit. So as Carl can probably attest, our backstage Facebook group was a flurry oftentimes. We called it backstage because it was only for the actors. Was a flurry all the time, and communication is really helpful. I recommend having some kind of social media group, a place where people can gather online, and coordinate. Where people were just really upset about this, and I had not foreseen this coming. So as a new showrunner, I'm like deer in the headlights, and then I had to go to California. I had to present at a conference about how Aurelia was going, and Aurelia blows up while I'm at the conference. Like it doesn't blow up, but like everything came to a head. Like so, I'm like up to like 4 in the morning, you know, trying to figure out whether or not we should have rules or whether we should remain collaborative. And I ultimately decided that we would remain highly collaborative, and so that people were allowed to step into someone else's story and make a determination. The only rule that I did end up setting was, please talk to this person, you know, on Facebook before you post a video saying that you stole their crystal, you know, communicate with them. But if it's a live event, you might not be able to do that so easily. You know, you might be truly improv, where someone just walks up and is like, so how much are you going to give me? Or I'm going to, like, sell your crystal, you know. Crystals were a real example from Aurelia.
Sort of a rule in improv, though, to be positive.
Yes.
You can't chop off the story, or you can't just,
Can't shut them down.
Yeah.
Right. You have to move things forward to be positive.
Exactly. And that's what I encourage people. And we had a few right around the time that I was in California, staying up till 2 in the morning trying to figure this thing out, who were like, I just can't handle this level of autonomy. Like, everything's going to blow up. Well, it didn't. But the ones who stayed, who were like, okay, I'm willing to give this a whirl. Okay, I'm going to work with, you know, this. Really, some amazing stuff came out of it. And it's just because they were able to hold their own plots lightly enough that they could roll with whatever came. And I've often found that the shockers that I got as a character, like, oh, now they did this to me, you know, or they're about to do this or whatever, were the best moments, because then I had an idea or I had a chance to do something that I had never seen coming.
It's like having Dr. Smith on the Lost in Space show.
Yeah.
He always screwed up something, so there was some reason to do something you didn't expect.
Exactly. And that's great. If you can build that for your character too, like this quirky side where they get to do things, it's super fun. Yeah.
I play a lot of tabletop role playing, and one of the dangers that you get into because of the commercial and the tabletop role playing is the players go and they buy the modules which describe the adventures that they're going to go on. And they go buy modules, and then they go back to their referee and say, oh, we should do this one. Well, they've read the whole module at that point. And so, you know, they're like, okay, I'm looking for a secret door in this room. And you're like, why are you doing that? Why would you even think to do it? And they're doing it because they read the module, they know there's one, right? You know, and so what I tried to do, like you're describing, is my brother James and I actually designed an entire world. And when I tell people that, they're like, that's insane. Well, we didn't design it down to the details, and we didn't know what every address in every town was and stuff like that.
Yep.
But we put together ideas for who was in charge of this area and who was in charge, and what was the conflict between those people, and you know, what was interesting about these mountains and stuff like that. And then you'd start an adventure, and I would play off of what the people in my group were interested in. And like you say, very often, you know, I had it in my head that we were going to go do this and this, and they turn left, and suddenly this whole different adventure happens, and even as the person, quote, writing the story, I had to be quick on my feet and say, oh, we're going this way now. You know, I gotta figure out what we're gonna do here in an hour.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing what shows up that you don't expect or what catches people's interest. I'll give you a quick example if you're running the thing. I had these creatures called the Fallen in the Aurelia world, and they were post-human. They had been part of the losing side of a war 1,000 years ago, which is why the world is now dark and why the world is full of man-eating plants and you can't go out there. And so they were locked outside the city. And of course, they were like they're angry at their estate. They've lost their corporeality, so they're mostly like spirits floating around. And they're always looking to take a body again, you know, to kind of have that back. And no one lets them in the city, and it's sort of like the nightmare, some of nightmares or children's fables, you know, watch out, if the Fallen gets in here, they're going to get you. Well, I didn't think much about this. Like, it had its place in the serial, but I wasn't thinking of it as like a major aspect of Aurelia. People wouldn't let this go. They got so excited about the Fallen. They're like, when are the Fallen going to invade the city? When are they going to contaminate the water supply? When is there going to be a war? You know, like, people were so excited about the Fallen, and we didn't end up having a war, but I did end up, you know, like, building it into some calls to action, which is the plot points, and we should touch on that too. And because people wanted to do it, and it was so cool. Like, some neat stuff came out of it, and there's just some fascinating things that I would have never foreseen, because I would have never thought to make post-human things.
Does that kind of illustrate the need for like an antagonist in the storyline?
Yes, and let's touch on that now, because that goes along with the whole action plot. It's really helpful if your group, you may not, you know, if you have a conflict that implies there's probably someone who's against, in my case, it was sort of like man versus the elements, I guess, like, you know, lights are going to go out and we're all going to die. But we did have some antagonists emerge, and that was really helpful. I hadn't planned for that, and looking back on it, I would have built that in. We ended up with one woman who wanted to play a crazy cultist leader who was like, they were the children of the void, and they were going to like destroy everything and take us back to holy nothingness. Let me tell you, she could terrify people. She's also a PhD student in philosophy in real life, so she could throw in all these crazy terms. Freaked out. All these big scary guys who were running around like, I'm an assassin. She had them all running scared. And then we had a guy who played Sergeant Pike, who was a miscreant constable who was always going off of what he was supposed to be doing and terrorizing the citizenry. It was great. Pike and Medamia, who was the Children of the Void cultist lady, they were good for so much conflict in so many storylines. And I had a couple other antagonists, like people who were working against the population, like scheming nobles who had their own agendas, and the chief of public watch who was supposed to be protecting the city, but nobody was really sure whose side he was on, and that kind of a thing. But nothing to the like dramatic extent that Sergeant Pike and Medamia provided. And it was like, it saved us, honestly. Like, Kyle heard it from me now. The actors saved the storyline in that regard. So think about that.
Did anybody who wanted to be possessed by the Fallen?
Yes, we had many volunteers. And we did. We had one woman who decided that she and her real life husband were both playing. And she was engaged to marry this terrible guy, and she decided she wanted her real life husband to save her from this guy. So like she had her fiance in the storyline that she didn't like. Like, he ended up, like, getting trapped by the temple and possessed by the Fallen, and then she was free from that. So, yes, it happened a few times at the end of the season. It was fantastic.
One of the best adventures I ran, one of the guys in it decided to become a double agent for the people that they were fighting against.
Ooh.
Without telling anybody else in the group. And it was really hard to pull off tabletop, you can imagine.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it involves
So
lots of note passing and stuff. And
Yep.
you know, you can't just do that because people will notice.
Yep.
And they're not supposed to do anything about it, but, you know, they will.
Totally.
But in a case like this where you have back channel communication, you could really have some fun with that. And he did a great job with it. He really played it up well, that he was just doing little things to subvert the group without showing his hand. And yeah, he had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and you can mimic that. Like, if you decide that you're going to do a live group and you're going to meet once every 2 months or something for an hour or 2 hours and have a storytelling event, you have all that time in between, you know, where if you need to pass notes or connect with people, you can do that scheming, which also helps with some of the, like, surprises that occur where it's like, what do you mean you stole my crystal? Well, you had to go sit and talk to the guy and be like, so if I steal one of your crystals, what would happen then? And we plot together. And along with antagonists, as far as keeping just the storyline rolling and moving, and then I promise we really will get into regular play, and then I've got, if we have time, I have a couple of little fun exercises, I hope. Anyway. With regular gameplay, I tried, for me, because Aurelia was running really quick and for 15 weeks, I dropped it once a week. If you have an event, you might just have something at the beginning of the event where you have like a plot movement, you know, for your story. If you're on an airship and you're traveling, maybe this event you're here, and these number of things occur in that location, and then next time you move to this location, you know, and something happens. In the case of Aurelia, it would be like, oh no, Horatio's lab blew up, and all like 100 years worth of research on how to, other alternate sources of energy just got destroyed by this terrible individual. You know, it could be that type of plot movement, or it could be something like, all the nobles got together, but their hoity-toity tea party was disrupted by these lower strata or lower class, people who are like fighting for social justice and better working conditions in the factories and all this sort of thing. So there's a variety of types. It can be super small or it can be like mammoth, type of plot movement. But if you have something stirring in the broader group, in the broader world, that gives people, it moves the plot forward, but it also gives people fodder to work with. And in Aurelia, I told people, you don't have to play along with the main storyline. I mean, it's there, it's going on in the world. But if you really want to tell the story of your bakery that's struggling in the 10th strata, and you're about to go out of business, and your children are about to be sent to the poorhouse or whatever, go ahead. And so we did. We had people whose storylines were very much about their day-to-day existence, people whose storylines had primarily to do with the energy crisis, and people who played back and forth across multiple storylines. So by providing that bigger framework, then if people have their individual plots going, you give them a place to jump in and do something with that, while also keeping the story itself moving for the whole group. Okay, so how about we talk just a little bit toward the end here about inner character play, like the nitty-gritty of back and forth and whatnot. Let's see what I haven't already covered. Okay, so Nick has already provided us, and Magnus as well, with some awesome resources for developing your character. I think a lot of us already have a persona maybe that we started or tinkered or toyed around with. I know I'm still working on mine. From a storytelling perspective, some of the questions that were on, I think, the second sheet were really helpful, like what are your characters' fears? What are they most afraid of? What is their flaw? In a traditional story setting where you're designing the story and then telling it from beginning to end, and you're manipulating all the characters because they're on the paper or they're on film or whatever, the flaw is huge. Because if you want your character to grow over the course of the story, you need to know what their weaknesses or what they can't do now that they need to be able to do later. So I encourage you as an individual participant in a story or someone who might to really work on that aspect of your character. Not just what era do they live in, what kind of costume do they wear, what's their occupation, but who are they really as a person inside, what's driving them. Habits, do they have well, everybody has habits. What are your character's habits? These you can pull out of your back pocket in a storytelling situation. If things are lagging a little bit and your character compulsively juggles, you just start juggling when things get, when there's kind of a lull. So you always have something else that you can pull out. What are their past enemies and friends? I think that was another question that was on the sheet. All those are really, really crucial because then there's always a wealth of things for you to pull out. And those aren't developed in a day. Honestly, when I started my character in Aurelia, who never got as developed as I wanted her to be because I was busy helping everybody else, run things, but I wanted to play along. I didn't know what I was going to do with her. I just knew that she was a seamstress and she was poor and she really wanted to own her own sewing machine. And because she had to go stand in line and pay a copper to do all these complicated stitches when she needed to, and everything else she did at home. She had bad eyesight and all this jazz. I learned more about her over the course of time, but it would have really helped me a lot if I had thought a little bit more deeply about, what's she afraid of, and which was pretty much everything, I think was the answer that I came up with at the end of the day.
And those points become really, really interesting sort of calling card pieces for your character. Something that everybody looks at and kind of identifies right away, or and it even helps them to remember your character.
Yes.
It's like, oh, you're the seamstress.
Yes.
You know, so.
It does.
Because it's out of the ordinary, it's something that's just catchy, you know. So.
Totally, yeah. Or if you can have a corresponding prop, even if it's something simple, that's really helpful. In December, my character will probably come around and ask you if you've seen the man in this photograph, because she's running through time trying to find her father, who she thought was on safari in Africa, but was actually time traveling and is now lost somewhere in another century. So anything that you can have, people see that and they're like, oh yeah, you're the one who's searching for this guy in traveling time, whatever it might be. Have that, carry it around, use it, whatever you can. So basically have an agenda of some kind. You can whip out your agenda and play it on the other person. If your character is scheming and conniving in some way, or has a secret, that's really nice and helpful, because then you can fish for some information. But basically, and I hope this is not scary when I say this, because it scared me at first when I thought about it, be prepared to have 3 possible outcomes. And that's a loose statement, but have around 3 possible outcomes for every move that you want to make as a character. You want to be, if you're like gonna go over to this person because you want to do something with them story-wise, know that they may turn around with an answer that you're not expecting, and you'll have to do something different. That's where the whole improv aspect comes in. And honestly, it's not necessarily so much preparation as it is like what comes to mind that you could do. How could you play off the thing they just handed you? Paul said it, and Maggie said it before we started, that improv actors always say that yes is the answer. When someone says, oh yeah, weren't we on the steamer ship together going to Antarctica? Yes, we were. Thank you for that. That was brilliant. I was like, oh yeah, that's true. And that, honestly, that's what happened with the role players in Aurelia, is the people who said no consistently, there was nowhere for them to go because no one could interact with them. Think of it like real life. Stuff happens, and you have to deal with the stuff that happens. Why do we get out of real life to go play in something that's supposed to be like real life? I don't know. I'm not sure how you say that, but honestly, that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you. Sally, that was my seamstress. It's also my grandmother's name. Sally's plot changed multitudinous times over the course of Aurelia, and it was so much more interesting at the end. And a lot of it was just like someone said, well, I need Sally for this, or Sally could do that. And I said, okay. And then, and then cool things happened. But then you get the examples like the crystal one that I gave that actually did happen, where people were like, you can't have my crystals. I already have plans for my crystals. I don't know. It sounded like real life to me. So every shocking thing that happens is actually an opportunity for you to do something fun and cool. You just have to think about it that way. Be prepared. It's like volleyball. When the ball lands, you've got to send it somewhere. I don't play volleyball, but my boss does. Also, one other thing. Superheroes, in my experience, are not as much fun to play as people with a problem. This is why Superman has been such a hard character for Hollywood and comic writers alike to deal with over the years, because what's his problem, really? That's why kryptonite was invented, because he didn't have a flaw, and it got boring after a while. And I saw this with Aurelia, that sometimes people would come in and they're like, my character's amazing, they have this superpower. Fantastic, but be sure you give them a weakness that is going to cause them problems. And that goes back to the whole flaw thing and whatnot.
Just talking with my daughter about the new Thor movie, and I'm not really a big fan of Thor. I read a lot of comic books, and I'm not really a big fan of Thor, and the reason why is because the storyline for Thor is some bad thing happens, Thor shows up, and he's conflicted about whether or not he should get involved. And then he pulls out the hammer and resolves the situation. Right? Yep. That is the storyline for Thor, because once the hammer comes out, everything else is done. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it's just not a compelling story. Whereas, like Spider-Man, he really tries to do good things, and it doesn't always work out. In fact, it often doesn't. And,
right.
You know,
Batman, certainly. Yeah. Right. And whichever comic you're a fan of, if you're a comic fan, that's just a challenge that has been faced in dealing with those kinds of characters. And I think the ones that tend to really endure and stick in the public imagination are the ones that we also know have great weakness that comes along with that great power. So if you're into that sort of thing, creating a character who's got this tremendous ability or something fantastic, give them a really interesting flaw that's going to trip them up a lot along the way.
And that's where some of the, like within steampunk, some of the character types that we have plenty of airship captains, we have plenty of time travelers, we have plenty of explorers, all that stuff.
Yep.
the ones that seem to get the most attention at cons and stuff are the people that are like the chimney sweep and the rat catcher and things like that. And when you think about it, they have kind of open access. For one thing, if it is truly kind of a Victorian-esque society, most people aren't even looking at them. So they come and go as they please, you know? And there's a whole bunch of story to be told there. You know, they can get to places and see things that most people can't.
No, that's a really great point. And it's interesting you should say that, because I actually had an actor who wrote to me, never met him in person before, we're good friends now, at the beginning of the show and said, I'm going to play a sewage worker at the bottom level of the city, and I'm going to make everybody love that guy. Like, that was his goal. It's like, I want people to love him. Carl is smiling, because he knows what I'm talking about. And, you know, for better or worse, toward the end of the show, so many people said, Radis, that was his character's name, Radis is still my favorite. And I don't know how he did it, but he made us care. And that guy was scared all the time, and he was not physically strong, really, and he was, like, afraid of the rats, the giant mutant rats, really, that live in the sewers. And, also, it turned out that he was the twin brother of the malevolent Sergeant Pike, so he had plenty of things to be afraid of once he found out who his brother was. And yet people loved this character, and he had so many problems, quote unquote, as a character, right? But it was great, and he could go places and do things. You know, people would always give Radis a mission in exchange for some food or coins or whatever to go, you know, poison this person or like spy on that guy or whatever. We had so many people killing people, it was great. We had one woman who poisoned her husband on camera. It's fantastic. Not for real, but, you know. Yeah.
What happened when you kill the character off? I mean, that seems like a point of real world conflict. Somebody's been playing this character and then somebody else comes along and kills them off. How did you resolve those?
Good question. I know in a lot of role-playing games it is possible for a character to die and then you have to come up with a new character. You could agree as a group that you want to do it that way. That was one of the very few rules that I set was you can't kill someone off without their permission. In this case, it's a very short period of time. We had people dying, but they were usually like non-player characters or like characters who've been made up to be in the world of a character who died. Occasionally, people volunteer to die or to kill off a character, and then a lot of times it was because maybe they were bored with that character or whatever, and it was a nice point of drama for everyone else, but it gave that actor a chance to reinvent themselves. So that can be a positive thing about it. People are like, why would I ever want to die? Well, if you're tired of playing your character or you just want the experience of something else, you can volunteer to be the victim, and then you get to be someone different. Yes?
I did that.
Did you?
The king is dead.
Oh no!
Well,
You do that.
but to your point, when you're doing collaborative storytelling, it does happen that your character ends up going someplace that you're just not real crazy about.
Exactly, and it does happen. Yeah.
And so then you have to ask the question, what do I do about that, playing this character? Do I push myself and continue to play this character even though I'm not really in a place that I want to be?
Right.
Or does the character go off to Africa, and I go make up a new one, or, you know, what?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Right.
Or does somebody get to kill me?
Who wants to kill me? Occasionally I put out a Facebook message, so what's that? You know?
And there's another dimension to that too. I think that you know, there's a lot of different aspects to steampunk, and one thing is the LARPing, character and persona stuff. Some people really like all the different costumes, and they have different types of costumes, which kind of almost dictate a different type of persona with each one of those, you know. So, you know, one minute you're wearing the chimney sweep, and then the next one you're, you know, kind of a high lord or something like that. Right. So that's one thing that's kind of nice about this situation is the avenue's there. You're not locked into just one.
Yeah.
You know, the trick is indicating to the people you're interacting with which character you are.
Yes.
So, you know, there's going to be some tells going on, like, you know, when I'm wearing this, I'm this guy. When I'm wearing that, this guy.
This guy.
So.
Yeah. That's the advantage of asynchronous. So you can play multiple characters at once. Anyone else?
I think it starts to sound like a soap opera, this last little part you guys were talking about.
It
And
does.
you get kind of tired of who you are, and so they kill you off and you're the evil twin or whatever it comes down. So you can look alike, but you're a whole different person.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. It's amazing. Like, there were some days where I looked at where the plot was, like everybody's plots, particularly toward the second half of a show, which, I mean, any story, the second half usually tends to err more toward the dark because there's a lot more conflict by that point that's built up in the story. I'm like, God, gosh, we were soap opera. Like, everybody's plotting against everybody, everybody's poisoning everybody. There's a fallen who are trying to invade the city. It was nuts. And the more crazy it got, the more people like loved it. I learned that along the way. I was like,
so,
okay.
You know, the
Yes.
other thing that we have available to us, sort of like in real life, you know, we can quit our jobs at any time and go to get a completely different job. And I think the same exists within this. But
yes.
I think soap operas and movies and stuff like that keep you boxed in because they have a set, they have a storyline that they're trying to do and things like that. We're not boxed in like that. So at any time you can quit your job and say, you know what, I just want to escape. I'm going down into the sewers and want to see it again. Now this is who I am.
Yep.
So without having to kill yourself off and discard everything you've done, there's another avenue to reinvent yourself.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really the thing. The sky is really the limit with the possibilities that you can come up with of how to explain something away or change something or alter something, just so long as whatever pertinent details need to be known by other people, we share with them.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is just, in everything in life, right? It's just a big key. So I think, I think we're about an hour. So I don't know if you want to run through an exercise quick or want to call it a day, take some questions.
The exercise sounds fun.
Okay. All right, let me see how many I made. Groups. All right, I have 5 groups. So can we organize ourselves into 5 groups? Does that work? Kind of tables, I guess.
Is it a group or include people you team with or not?
Yeah, people you could team with just to talk about things and brainstorm.
Hello.
Let's see, which should we start with?
Karen said she sent you a note.
Yes, she did. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to respond yet, but I saw it. Thank you.
She felt like she needed to write.
Aw. Well, I'm taping it all, so if it's of interest to her, I'm going to throw it out there and everybody can have it. All right, I'm going to give you 2. One is for a story.
Sure, yeah, I'm just trying to
And
make sure it's not in the way for somebody else.
Never touch it. Fish fuck.
We'll point her phone over here so that.
call me around.
Also,
Alright, so we got 2.
and their kids look like their parents. Pretty sure that if I skin it, I look like me. That would cause a big alimony lawsuit.
So basically, like, some ideas for the
That
process.
woman would not be happy.
Unrelated, but just kind of there's a character one, and then there is a one video version story.
Julianne, you bring your
Collaborative story about science and adventure.
bring your pad.
So what are some
And see how that goes together with all the big characters. Speaking of crystals, right?
Rory's character was sent further into the future.
I think we're all doing the same thing.
So like.
Alright, we're about to go into an exercise here, so I'm going to switch this off for a second.